The sky above Wren was supposed to be empty. That's what the operations map said. That's what the flight lead radioed. And that's what Second Lit Marcus Kidcap Dillard believed when he broke formation and flew his P-47D northeast to make time. He was early, too early. Briefing had been clear, no engagement before rendezvous, but Dillard had launched 10 minutes ahead, eager to impress. His first combat sortie. His boots weren't even dirty yet. His gun camera lens was still taped. His oxygen mask smelled like storage. He climbed alone, humming nervously under his breath, watching for landmarks he wasn't sure he recognized. It wasn't arrogance. It was hunger. He wanted to matter. At 9,000 feet, he spotted them. 5 German fighters. Low, tight, fast-angled directly at a column of B-24 Liberators, still limping south after a raid. They were trailing smoke. One had an engine out. Another had its tail gun spinning wild. Clearly jammed. They didn't see him. Neither did the Germans. Dillard blinked hard. This wasn't a simulation. This wasn't a drill. This was real. He reached for his radio. Nothing. His headset hissed dead channel. He checked again, antenna switch toggled. Frequency confirmed, volume up. Still silence. He was alone, and they were already in position. He knew the protocol. Wait. Stay high, rejoin formation, let the intercept team handle it. But the intercept team was 10 minutes late, and the bombers had 30 seconds. So Dillard pushed throttle, felt the Thunderbolt growl, and angled in not toward the German fighters, but above them. Then he did something no one trained him to do. He pulled into a soft spiral. Not a dive, not a roll, just a downward drift. It made no tactical sense. It offered no offensive posture. But it placed him directly in the airspace the Germans would soon enter. And he kept going. Down. Soft. Controlled. Like a feather that had teeth. The Germans didn't see him yet. The bombers didn't know he was there. And the sky was now his alone. Where 10 lives depended on a kid who wasn't supposed to be here. And a move he'd never been allowed to try. He got the name Kidcap in week 1. It wasn't cruel. It was true. He looked 15, smiled like a grocery clerk, and wore his leather flight cap backward like a baseball cap. Said it helped him focus. No one believed that, but they liked laughing at it. And Marcus Dillard didn't mind. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was trying to learn fast. Too fast. He pushed throttle when he should have coasted. Banked before confirming clearance. Once during formation practice, he drifted too far left, crossed into another element's wake, and nearly got clipped by a wingtip. His instructor said he flew like he was playing tag with ghosts. Another added he was trying to impress birds. They all laughed. Dillard just nodded. But he had this thing, a spiral, not a spin, not a stall, not a shallow drift turn where he'd feather the throttle mid-bank and let the Thunderbolt drop in slow arcs, as if painting invisible waves in the sky. Instructors hated it. It wasn't in any manual. They barked at him, "Why would you reduce lift in a turn? You're bleeding energy." He'd try to explain something about fluid drift. Visual inversion. Target offset timing, but the more he talked, the more confused they got. One finally said he was either a prodigy or a danger. And either way, stop doing that. He didn't. Because when he flew that way, something clicked. It didn't feel like flying. It felt like balancing, like slipping between equations. He wasn't fighting gravity. He was shaping around it. But try telling that to veterans who watched friends stall into trees because they misjudged airspeed by 3 knots. They mocked him to his face. Not cruel, but constant. When he finally got his first assignment, escort duty, they said, "Try not to draw pictures up there." Kidcap. He laughed, said nothing. But on his checklist, beside flaps and trim, he penciled one word in tiny handwriting drift. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew it was his. And when the sky broke over France, it was the only thing he trusted to more than the stick in his hand. The Republic P-47D Thunderbolt was not a subtle machine. It was heavy, loud, overbuilt, and ungraceful. Pilots called it the Jug because it looked like a milk jug with wings. It wasn't elegant, but it was fast in a dive and built like a brick. You could take a 20-millimeter hit to the wing root and still limp home. But you couldn't finesse it. It wasn't meant for grace. It was meant for blunt force. And yet Marcus Dillard didn't fly it that way. While others used it as a battering ram, he flew it like a stylus. He didn't force turns. He curved them. He didn't hammer throttle. He pulsed it. Instructors said that was wrong, dangerous, inefficient. The P-47 was designed for high-speed slashing attacks. You dove from altitude, fired once, and climbed away. You didn't linger, you didn't drift. But Dillard kept drifting. He'd fly flat spirals at 8,000 feet, throttling mid-bank, floating into turns so slow you could time them with a wristwatch. It looked like a mistake, but it wasn't. Not to him. The Thunderbolt had a huge turbocharged engine up front. If you let off throttle mid-turn, the nose would stay heavy while the wings slowed unevenly. The result wasn't a stall. It was a yaw wobble. Unstable. Ugly. But Dillard used that instability like a tool. He found that if you did it right, the plane would pivot flat, rotate around its own wobble point, and let you reposition in the vertical without sharp inputs. It wasn't in any manual. No instructor taught it. Most pilots avoided it, because if you mistimed it, you dropped into a spin. But Dillard wasn't avoiding it. He was chasing it. The Jug had one gift most missed survivability. You could fly it ugly and still come home. And in that margin, Dillard found something strange. Control through asymmetry, balance by mistake. He didn't want to outfly enemies. He wanted to confuse them. And the Thunderbolt, with all its weight and lag and bulk, gave him the perfect tool. It just needed to be misunderstood. And Marcus Dillard was a master of misunderstanding the right way. He just hadn't had the chance to prove it. Not until that morning over Rennes. From 9,000 feet up, the sky looked organized. German fighters above, bombers below, lines drawn in airs clean as a chart. But Dillard didn't see angles. He saw rhythm. The FW-190s were approaching in a staggered descent, tight formation, wings level, noses down, perfect geometry for a slashing dive. Each fighter would pick a bomber, fire one burst, and vanish. It was a hunt, calculated, clean, until he interrupted it. He could have attacked from behind, standard intercept, line up, fire, disengage, but he wasn't fast enough. He couldn't outrun their dive angles, and if he charged in flat, they'd turn and shred him. So he did something they wouldn't calculate. He climbed slightly, then pulled left into a descending spiral, not a dive, not a roll, just a drifting orbit, shallow, off-axis, pointless by doctrine. But it put him directly between the FW-190s and their targets, not as a threat, as a question mark. From their view, he wasn't chasing, he wasn't fleeing. He was hovering in motion, spiraling sideways, mid-throttle, not advancing, just rotating. And in that rotation, he created a problem. If they aimed for the bombers, he'd be in their field of fire. If they aimed for him, they'd lose their angle. Their entire attack pattern was built on prediction velocity, descent rate, turn radius. But he wasn't giving them a path. He was breaking the geometry. One pilot dipped early, then hesitated. Another widened his turn to avoid the spiral and lost speed. Within seconds, their formation broke not because of threat, but because of math. Dillard had introduced friction into timing, drift into velocity, noise into clarity. And now, no one was where they were supposed to be. He had no kills, no trigger pull, just position, disruptive, unreadable, like a slow clock in a room full of snipers. They weren't confused because he was good. They were confused because he didn't match the numbers. And in air combat, numbers are everything. He stayed in spiral a moment longer, then dropped throttle again. Just enough to slip under the belly of the lead FW-190. No one fired, because no one understood what was happening, especially not Dillard. He just knew it was working. It lasted 3 seconds. The drift slipped too low. The spiral tightened, and the Thunderbolt dropped from the sky like a door torn off a hinge. He hadn't meant to go that deep. He'd misread the throttle pulse, overcorrected rudder, and the nose buckled. The horizon vanished. The cockpit shuddered. The left wing dipped hard. The plane rolled nearly 90 degrees, and Dillard felt gravity like a punch to the chest. His breath caught. His hands froze. He'd stalled himself into a death roll. 2,000 feet wasn't enough. Not in that angle. Not with that weight. His training screamed recover. Throttle up. Rudder correct. Stick level. But the Thunderbolt wasn't responding. The plane twisted, not like a fighter, but like a falling silo. He caught a glimpse of earth, then sky, then trees, then a flash of silver. One of the bombers. He was below them. A B-24 banked left to avoid him. Its tail gun spun. The gunner didn't know who he was. He opened fire. Dillard's canopy sparked. One round struck near the fuselage. Another clipped the wing root. Smoke filled the cockpit. Not from fire, from shock, from oil shaking loose, from pressure, equalizing the wrong way. Dillard closed his eyes, pictured his instructor's face. The one who'd said the jug couldn't turn like that. Then he did the opposite of recovery. He let go. Not fully. Just enough to let the plane find gravity's axis. No fight, just surrender. The roll widened, the nose dipped, and somehow, miraculously, the Thunderbolt stabilized. Not level, but flat enough to breathe. He pulled throttle gently, felt the engine hiccup, then engage, and the plane was flying again, barely, altitude 600 feet. His hands trembled, his legs locked. He hadn't died, but he had almost handed death the controls. He looked up, saw the bombers still flying. One had smoke trailing, another had a wing dented, but they were moving. He had stalled into their fire, ruined their formation, and almost killed himself, but they were still alive. He wiped oil from his goggles, took one breath, then banked right. Slowly, carefully, like a man who'd tasted the cliff and chosen not to fall again. Should have pulled away, regrouped, climbed to safety, and waited for his squadron. But Dillard didn't. He couldn't. The bombers were still under threat, and something had shifted inside him, not just adrenaline, something sharper, like certainty wrapped in madness. He had nearly died spiraling into confusion. But the German fighters had broken apart. That was real. That was tactical. And now, with his body shaking and engine moaning, he angled back toward them, not head-on, not from altitude, but again sideways. Soft spiral. Mid-throttle. Throttle off, rudder pulse, drift. The forbidden idea wasn't to outmaneuver, it was to unbecome a target, to present motion that couldn't be solved. Fighters weren't trained to attack floating objects. They were trained to track vectors. But Dillard had no vector. He was an orbit in decay, a silhouette of motion without threat. And in that profile, he found invisibility. One FW-190 locked on him, tried to match angle, came in high. Dillard didn't fire. He just let the drift continue. The German pilot overshot, banked to reattack, and exposed his flank to another bomber's turret. It fired, missed, but the spiral worked. Another fighter panicked, dropped too fast, then reversed. In doing so, he clipped wake turbulence and lost tracking. Chaos. That was the effect. Not destruction, disruption. Dillard kept circling, not tightly, not high, but always slightly wrong. Slightly broken, enough to make them hesitate. That hesitation spread. Every second spent tracking Dillard was one less second spent attacking the bombers. He had no advantage. He had no orders. But he had a shape they couldn't solve. From above, it looked like a broken compass. From below, like a halo fraying at the edge. Dillard wasn't a threat. He was a delay, a confusion field. He wasn't fighting them. He was undoing their pattern. One German pilot radioed, "Is he baiting us or crashing?" Another said he's too slow to matter, but they kept looking, and that was enough. Dillard banked left again, shallow and uneven. His plane groaned. His ammo remained untouched, but the airspace had shifted. The logic was breaking, and Dillard knew he had just crossed the line. He wasn't flying anymore. He was interfering, and somehow it was working. He waited until the third German fighter banked right to realign with the lowest bomber. That one was trailing black smoke, one engine limping, and its belly gunner already unconscious. Dillard didn't think. He pulsed throttle, flattened his spiral into a shallow descent, and kicked rudder left. It wasn't graceful. It was crooked. The Thunderbolt slid through the air like a tool meant for a different job, but it lined him up just enough, just barely. The FW-190 flashed across his sight line, and Dillard pressed the trigger. 50 caliber guns screamed. The first burst missed. The second raked across the tail. The third tore into the wing root. He saw it impact flash, control surface buckle, a sharp yaw to port, and then the fighter dipped hard. Smoking. No explosion, no fireball. But it was gone. One down. Dillard didn't cheer. He didn't even breathe. He just banked again into the drift. The second fighter was coming in low, trying to outturn the spiral. Dillard knew he couldn't follow, not directly, so he let the Thunderbolt slip, eased the stick, then cut throttle completely. The P-47 dropped not fast, not sharp, but heavy. The German overshot, pulled vertical. And that gave Dillard a moment, a second. He punched throttle full, the engine screamed, the jug surged, and he rose underneath the German like a mine surfacing beneath a ship. He fired again. This time one burst, clean, short, enough. The FW-190 jerked sideways. The canopy burst, then it spiraled away, pilotless, two down, but now the rest were turning. Not all of them, but enough. Two fighters split into a scissor pattern. One tried to bait Dillard into a vertical chase. The other stayed low. He couldn't follow both, so he didn't. He spiraled again, higher, wider, a shape no one trained for. The fighters paused, confused, then broke again, unsure who he was pursuing. He wasn't pursuing anyone. He was fracturing the chase. The bombers used the moment to escape. Engines flared. Formation shifted. They banked away southward. Dillard stayed, alone. One fighter re-engaged, fired once, missed wide. He overshot. Dillard didn't return fire. He didn't need to. His spiral continued. Not because it was the best move, because it was unreadable. And in combat, unreadable can be invincible. 1 minute later, the sky was empty. The fighters had pulled off. The bombers were dots. And Dillard, still spiraling, finally leveled out. His heart pounded, his mouth dry. But he was alive, and so were they. The radio intercepts told the truth better than any after-action report. Luftwaffe pilots weren't just confused. They were angry. The first voice came sharp, clipped, from a fighter lead with too much pressure in his tone. "He's not chasing, he's drifting." Another followed. "Is that American even targeting anyone?" a third, exasperated, barked, "He's not attacking. He's blocking us." Then silence. Then something worse, a laugh. One German pilot broke protocol and said it plain, that one he flies like a drunk. They couldn't compute him. Not because he was superior, but because he was different. Every angle they expected, every thrust or dive or roll, they got none of it. They saw a heavy American fighter hovering in motion, not attacking, not fleeing, just rotating slightly off-axis. And that was worse than a direct threat, because it meant they couldn't predict him. And in air combat, prediction is survival. One FW-190 tried to go vertical for a clean dive on the limping B-24. The moment he did, Dillard spiraled underneath him, not to engage, but to occupy the same airspace. The German pulled back, afraid of a collision. Another pilot saw this and misread Dillard's vector. He broke left, right into his own wingman's path. Mid-air confusion. Both evaded, but their formation shattered, altitude lost, timing disrupted. One German's oxygen mask wasn't sealed. He blacked out mid-roll and recovered at 3,000 feet. Too late to rejoin. Another called out, "The American is baiting us into turning on each other." No one confirmed, but no one argued. The bomber formation, once soft targets, now drifted further south, untouched. Dillard had fired only 2 bursts, but his presence did more than bullets. It turned clarity into noise. One German wing commander demanded target confirmation. "Where is the Thunderbolt now?" "Silence." Then, "He's gone." The commander replied, "Gone how?" "Shot down, no," came the answer. "He vanished. He's spiraling somewhere else." That wasn't fear. That was defeat. Not by force, by confusion. And for a pilot trained to calculate. Confusion is death. The German fighters pulled off one by one. Not routed, but rejected. The airspace was no longer theirs. Not because they lost, but because they couldn't explain what they were seeing. And in war, what you can explain can't be controlled. Dillard didn't chase them. He didn't need to. They left the sky for him, not out of fear, but frustration. And that was enough. He didn't land so much as collapse. The P-47 came in heavy, nose low, wheels half deployed, one brake line severed. He aimed for a grassy slope outside a hedgerow east of Angers, cut throttle, and prayed. The gear caught unevenly, the tail bounced, the wing dipped, then the entire plane slid 40 feet before slamming to a stop in a field of flattened oats. The propeller was bent. The right tire exploded. He sat motionless for a full minute, listening to the engine click as it cooled. His hands were locked on the stick. His legs wouldn't move. The canopy was stuck. Smoke curled from somewhere behind the dash. Finally, he kicked the latch open with one boot and rolled out. He hit the ground hard, grass in his mouth, nose bleeding, eyes stinging. He got to his knees, then to his feet, then fell again. His back wouldn't straighten. His right hand trembled so badly he couldn't undo his glove. A farmer ran toward him, then 2 soldiers. Someone screamed American in French. He nodded, coughed, said Thunderbolt, and passed out. They carried him to a field ambulance. The medic looked 17, wide eyes, quiet hands. He asked Dillard what happened. Dillard said nothing, just stared at the roof of the truck and whispered, 10 bombers. The medic didn't understand. He bandaged a shallow cut on Dillard's scalp, dabbed iodine on the wrists, checked for spinal damage. Nothing fatal, but the shock was real. The bruising across his ribs would take weeks to fade. He couldn't lift his arm above his shoulder, couldn't write his name without shaking. When he was finally stable enough to speak, a captain from Air Intelligence came in. Suit, clipboard, sharp mustache. "Lieutenant Dillard," he said, "your gun camera confirms 1 kill, possibly 2. Damage reports from bombers suggest you prevented at least 4 direct engagements. Your plane is totaled. Your body is wrecked. So tell me, what the hell did you think you were doing? Dillard looked at the man, eyes bloodshot, voice hoarse. I was slowing them down. The captain frowned. That spiral move. That was deliberate. Dillard nodded. It worked. The man scribbled something. You broke formation protocol. I know. You engaged without clearance. I know. You used an unauthorized maneuver. Dillard smiled. I know. The captain closed the folder. Congratulations. You're either lucky or insane. Maybe both. Dillard leaned back. Outside, the engines of returning Thunderbolts rumbled past. A mechanic saluted him through the window. The salute wasn't regulation. It was respect. Because somehow, the kid who wasn't supposed to fight had just saved 10 bombers with a spiral no one believed in, and he was still breathing. The report read like fiction. Lieutenant Marcus Dillard entered combat space at 0947 hours, engaged enemy fighters via non-linear drift maneuver, successfully disrupted intercept pattern, 1 confirmed kill, 1 probable, 6 bombers avoided direct attack, Thunderbolt sustained medium structural damage, no friendly fire, no civilian casualties. Pilot survived. But the board didn't understand what he'd done. They understood numbers, angles, footage, not motion outside logic. The gun camera showed bursts, tail hits, 1 mid-air evasion, but it didn't capture the spiral, the drift, the shape of what he did. No manual covered it, no training film demonstrated it, no instructor endorsed it, so they wrote it off. Maneuver inconclusive, possibly accidental. Pilot action under review. The phrase appeared twice, in the summary and in the footnote. But the bomber crews knew. Word spread quietly across the squadrons that someone, some kid flying wrong, had slowed the Luftwaffe with a curve. The first letter arrived 3 days later. A ball turret gunner wrote it. To whoever that was up there, thanks. We were out of ammo. You stalled them long enough for us to live. That's all I've got. Dillard kept it, folded, in his locker. No response needed. Just proof someone understood. Back at base, no medal came, no commendation. But pilots stared when he walked by. Not envy, not mockery. Just something new. Uncertainty wrapped in respect. One mechanic asked if he meant to do it. Dillard shrugged. Half the time, yeah. The rest of the time, he didn't know. A flight instructor approached him outside the mess tent. Said, "You almost killed yourself up there." Dillard nodded. "Yeah, but you didn't." "Nope. And they didn't get the bombers." Dillard looked at him, waited. "So maybe there's something to that turn of yours." The instructor didn't smile, just walked away. But that was enough. In training rooms, someone drew a wide spiral on a chalkboard. No label, just the shape. Cadets stared at it. Some erased it, others tried to copy it. During a night flight, one rookie mimicked the maneuver too low, nearly spun out, but recovered, laughed in the debrief and said, "Guess I'm no Kidcap." That name stuck, became code. Not for Dillard, for the move, for the idea. Instructors still forbade it officially, still punished cadets who tried. But late at night, with nothing but stars and wind, some of them tested it, drifted into spirals, let throttle pulse mid-bank. Not to show off, to understand. Dillard never asked for credit, never wanted it. He just wanted to fly different. And now others were, too. They didn't call it the Dillard maneuver. They didn't name it at all. That would have made it official. And this wasn't official. It was something else, something passed sideways between squadrons, not written, not taught, just hinted, described without endorsement. a whisper carried by men who'd flown too close to certainty and barely escaped. The first time it appeared in print, it wasn't in a manual. It was in a safety bulletin. Pilots are advised not to intentionally induce lateral stall drift at low altitude under pursuit pressure. Engine control surfaces may be compromised. That was all. But buried in the language was an admission. Someone had done it, and it had mattered. Then came the questions. Instructors asking cadets what they'd do if evasion meant loss of flight path, if motion without purpose could still have effect. One old trainer at Kingman scrawled a phrase on a blackboard before a stall drill. What if delay is defense? No one erased it. No one asked. They just flew, somewhere over Corsica. A young pilot named Baxter used a wide spiral to evade 3 109s, claimed he read about it in a letter from a guy who knew a guy who was there, in Tunisia. An operations officer quietly advised a replacement pilot to keep your spiral loose if they're tracking you from above. No elaboration, just a tone. The change came slow, but it came. Missions once drawn with straight vectors now included fallback arcs. Flight formations left subtle space for drift patterns. Instructors stopped punishing throttle pulse as long as altitude held. The spiral wasn't doctrine, but it was becoming a tool, not a sharp one, not reliable, but sometimes in chaos. Exactly what was needed. And still, no one said Dillard. He wasn't promoted. He wasn't photographed. He was just the kid who'd flown wrong at the right time. He recovered enough to fly again, but he never returned to frontline combat. His wrist never regained full rotation. He became a tow pilot, pulled gliders, hauled freight, flew behind the action. And that was fine, because somewhere out there, new pilots were spinning wide into unapproved turns, watching enemies break formation, and wondering why it worked. And someone would say quietly, it's a Kidcap thing. Not in mockery anymore. In memory of a spiral that wasn't supposed to be flown, a tactic that began as a mistake, and a pilot who understood that sometimes. You don't break the enemy. You bend time until they miss their chance to win. The P-47D he flew that day didn't survive the war. After field repairs, it was reassigned to a stateside training unit in Georgia where it was flown hard. Crashed once during a landing drill. Patched, then finally stripped for parts in early 1946. The nose cone ended up in a junk pile. One of the wing spars went to a machine shop. The tail number was recycled onto a newer airframe. No ceremony, no plaque, just pieces scattered across peacetime. No one wrote, "This is the plane that spiraled into history," because history didn't remember the shape, only the outcome. Dillard didn't keep a photo of it. He didn't frame his flight jacket. He left the service in late 45 with little more than a handshake and a limp. Worked at a sawmill in Idaho. Flew bush planes for logging crews. Married a woman who thought his flying stories were exaggerated. He didn't argue. Just smiled and changed the subject. The spiral never got a name, but it never disappeared either. Every few years. A new generation of instructors noticed a pattern in combat film enemy pursuit, broken not by force but by confusion. Throttle pulses, wobble drift, asymmetric delay. The reports never said Dillard, but they said enough. Some called it tactical falling, others ghost drift. One even labeled it aerial bleeding, the act of losing speed in a way that poisons pursuit logic. But across airfields, from Okinawa to Alabama, pilots scratched spirals on notebooks. Some didn't even know why, just that it made sense, like instinct someone else had left behind. In 1978, a warbird collector found a rusted Thunderbolt control stick in a scrapyard. faded paint, scored grips. On the left thumb panel, carved in shaky letters, were 2 words slow first. He mounted it in a glass box, labeled it Unknown Pilot, P-47 series. No one connected it to Dillard, but that was fine, because legacy isn't a name, it's a pattern. A motion passed hand to hand, flight to flight, until it becomes part of instinct, and somewhere, in a quiet hangar or night sky, a young pilot feels his plane wobble during a turn, hesitates, then eases into it. Doesn't fight, just lets it spiral for 1 more second, and lives because of it. Not because he was taught, but because someone once refused to fly by the book, and the machine, long gone, still remembers the touch.